Welcome back, guys. I am a little bit late, but with the introduction of a new pack, obviously, and the Duelist Cup going on, I want to go over the top 5 decks that you can use in this Duelist Cup, but also on the ladder until we get the new pack early January, the best decks that are in the game right now, the top 5 for the month of December and early January. And without further ado, let's hop right in. This time around, as basically always, I'm giving the number 5 spot to one of the newer decks, if that is possible, and I think in this case it is. Obviously, once again, you could definitely argue that something like Labyrinth could also be placed here, but I think that the White Forest stuff is actually quite nice. In my opinion, the best version is the version with the Toybox engine, since this is a very consistent and also establishes quite a strong endboard. You're also able to play the new Red Eyes Dark Dragoon in here if you so desire. You don't need to play him, can definitely play without him, but he in my playtime definitely came up a few times, was pretty nice, so I can only suggest you put him in here because he's actually quite nice and insulating a further plays. Sometimes you can make him by the 5th summon, which is actually very nice. You also have a lot of non-engine space in here, which is always cool. The only disadvantage of this deck, I guess, is, but this is a disadvantage of a lot of decks, you are not that great into Maxi. There is no obvious play that you can make into Maxi. Maybe if you have established the board far enough, you can make a silhouette rabbit into the statue. That could be a play, but then again, it's also not that strong. But we have a lot of hand traps that we can use to stop our opponent, so this should in theory work, and you should not be dying from passing over to your opponent. The Toybox engine definitely gives this deck a lot of consistency and way stronger boards, giving you the ability to play through a lot of hand traps, keep your extenders in the back basically, and then see whether your opponent has some things to stop you, and then you can just go ahead and use the Toybox engine. This is definitely a deck like Dragon Link is, that is not really being stopped by, I call that, simple hand traps. Simple hand traps would be something like an Ash Blossom or just one Imperm, and more complex or big impact hand traps would be a Nibiru Resolving or Drone and Lockbot, for example. You would definitely need more of these high impact hand traps to stop this deck, or Maxi also would be a high impact one, whereas an Effect Valor would be a low impact one. These low impact hand traps definitely don't really effectively stop this deck. You can also play something like Skill Drain, since you can under Skill Drain still send away for cost the tank and the soldier and so on and so forth, which is what actually makes this deck quite strong, and you will end up with very consistent good boards that not a lot of opponents will be able to play through. Also, your interruptions are very layered. You have something in the grave with the Wars of the White Forest that can summon the flip down monster, and this flip down monster Severa is really impactful, really hard to play around, since it is bound to the trap and not really to the monsters on the field. So my personal number 5, and you can definitely argue about whether the Centurion version or this version is better. I definitely like this version more, and you could also argue that something like Labyrinth, because it is so flexible, could be here in the 5th spot. By my number 5 for this month is White Forest. For the number 4, I have my old favorite, the deck that I have won most of the tournaments I won with, which is just Fire King Snake Eyes. And definitely have not really seen a lot of Fire King Snake Eyes or any Snake Eyes on the ladder. We have received the Snake Eyes, the Yubel star, but wait for probably January, when the Fiendsmith stuff will most likely come, and then we will once again see some Snake Eyes action. Whether or not you are excited for that is another thing, obviously. But yeah, Fire King Snake Eyes, we still have this very strong deck that has an insane going second strategy with the Salamanca Raging Phoenix, as well as World Sea Dragons, the Atlantis. Going first at this point, it is actually a bit inconsistent, since the Ash is at 1, the Poplar is at 1, Bonfire is at 2. You have 1 for 1, and then you only have 1 wanted, and obviously you have your triple Diabel, which is why I opted to go for Fire King Courtier Volcanics 3 times. There were definitely lists that did not play the Volcanics, but I think at this point in time, with all of these hits coming to the Fire King and the Snake Eyes engine, we definitely need the Volcanics to make it once again a bit more consistent. Then this deck is really strong, still really strong, makes an insane going first bird board that is really hard to break. You have follow-up via your Flamebird Dragon. Your interruptions are very layered. A lot of them are in the graveyard. Your Runics, for example, so cannot be interacted with that easily. Evenly matched Dark Ruler doesn't really work here. And then you have this really solid going second kill plan here, which is why this deck is still very strong. Also has a lot of space for non-engine, as you can see, even though the non-engine space has definitely been a bit less since we have to tag in cards like the triple Ulcanix to make it a bit more consistent. But still one of the strongest decks in the game, up until the point, I think, when we see some forbidden moves from Konami, like the original Sinful Spoils that has just happened in the TCG, or something like the Flamebird Dragon. Until that point, this will just be a very strong deck, but you can be excited because not a lot of people are playing it on the ladder right now, so you don't really have to deal with that a lot. Go ahead and play this if you still have it, because it's still very strong, and my number 4 for this month. My number 3 is my number 2 from last month, Ritual Beast. It's a bit sad for Ritual Beast since they definitely wanted to play the Pot of Prosperity, which is now forbidden, and also having double Dimension Shifter is very nice since they can play quite well under Dimension Shifter. Ritual Beast is definitely a deck that has a high ceiling, so it's not like pick this deck up and be very good with this. It's not like Tenpai, where you can really learn this quite fast. This is a complicated deck, but if you master it, if you really know what you are doing with this deck, then it is extremely strong, extremely flexible, and you can play cards like the Protoss, locking your opponent out from Darks, from Fires, even though the Protoss is definitely a bit weaker in the current meta, since you can't really assume that everybody is on Tenpai anymore. There are definitely less Tenpai players. You will probably still, in the Duelist Cup, encounter a lot of Tenpai opponents where the Arch-Nemesis Protoss is still nice. You can also go with the Thunder Dragon Colossus in the extra deck if you wanted to, but you can also, and we have seen this with lists in the past of the Rid Beast, that people just not put in the Protoss here and still were able to do quite fine. Very consistent, a lot of starters, but you have to understand a lot of combo lines. You have to understand how all of this works with the Ritual Beast Ulti Cannerhawk, how this combo works. So a lot to learn for you if you want to master this deck. But I think this deck is a very niche deck for people that really want a deep dive into a deck and that want to play a deck for a long time. This is kind of like Branded Despia in my opinion. Branded Despia also a very complicated deck that had a big fan base of people really playing it intensely, and I think Ritual Beast is kind of the same. So if you're looking for a combo deck that is hard to master, then Ritual Beast is definitely the pick for you. We'll also see no real big hits here, but a few cards that will come in the future, like the Mulch Armies or the Dominus Impulse, will definitely be bad for this deck. So it is now a good time to play this deck, and it will be a bit worse in the future, but still a strong deck that will also be a solid option in the future. My number 3, Ritual Beasts. Number 2 definitely has to go to Yubel. It's basically unhit, you could say. I mean, yeah, we have the opening of the Spirit Gates to 2, we have 2 Phantom of Yubels, but by the way, this is a mistake. There should be not a Psy-Frame Gear Gamma, but the other Psy-Frame, the Spell Negate Psy-Frame, you can play instead of this one here. But yeah, Yubel still has everything that it needs. The Throne is at 3, we have this still at 2, this at 2, we have the Samsardi Lotus at 3. This still works. We have a 1-for-1. It's definitely not the most consistent deck ever, but it's also not inconsistent. Definitely works. Can play a lot of non-engine. Has one of the strongest going first boards. Going second, it can be a bit hard sometimes because it's not that straightforward killing your opponent. That is like it is in Fire King Snakers, for example. But this is just a solid deck in terms of you can play a lot of non-engine. You have a good amount of engine. It's quite consistent. You have a strong going first board. You are quite flexible. You have alternative win cons with this putting damage on your opponent via the Nightmare Pain. This just works. This is just good. You can play cards like a Palooza where you can end up on them. You have this very strong, one of the strongest interactions in the game currently, Unchained Sword of Rage into an SP Little Knight, taking away basically 3 cards of your opponent if you want to imagine the extreme scenario. So Yubel definitely extremely strong. We will probably see further hits. I don't really expect Phantom of Yubel to stay at 2 in the long run. I can also see hits on the Nightmare Throne, but they somehow don't want to touch this thing. Also in the TCG, they just recently put the Yubel 2-1, Phantom of Yubel, that is, still works the deck then, it will still be strong. So I think Yubel has a lot of life left in the deck core, and you will also get additional support with the Fiendsmith stuff. So if you are a Yubel enjoyer, or if you want to play the deck, I think it's still not too late to grab this deck, to pick this up, put the Fiendsmith stuff in the future in this deck, and this will probably be a strong deck for a while. This is my prediction, at least, until they really hard hit it. They really basically rotation this deck out of the format. But for now, one of the most balanced and strong decks, only second to one other deck that you might have already guessed. So Yubel, my number 2 for this month. And then no big surprise here, we have Tenpai at first place. This is just the strongest deck that you can play right now. No big surprise here, but there's one caveat I want to mention here. If you have this deck, if you enjoy this deck like I do, like I invested in this, then go ahead and play this month in the Duelist Cup. Enjoy this, because I am definitely calling hits on this deck. Not a lot of hits, I would assume, but at the end of the month with the new ban list, we will most likely see something like the field spell going to 1, or maybe a more extreme one, the Tenpai Dragon Chandra going to 1, or maybe 2-2, could also see that, but Chandra and field spell are definitely the most likely ones. We've also seen in the TCG that they have hit the Kaiman. We could also see a Kaiman hit. I guess whatever they do, they will just go down one step, so either the field spell to 1, the Chandra to 2, or maybe Kaiman to 2. They will probably not go ahead and nuke it like they did in the TCG with Kaiman to 1 and also Chandra to 1. But come the end of this month with the new ban list, we will most likely see the beginning of Tenpai hits, since the pack has rotated out of the shop now, and this seems to be Konami's moment when they start hitting the deck. But yeah, even with these hits, even with the Chandra going to 2 or the field spell going to 1, this is still one of the strongest decks. We unfortunately only have one shifter now. We have lost a Pot of Prosperity, so they definitely have hit around Tenpai a bit. Still the strongest deck in the room, and will probably stay so for a while. We will have to see how the Snake Eyes Fiendsmith stuff and the Yubel Fiendsmith stuff works out in the end. I guess if we get the Fiendsmith engine unhit, then the Snake Eyes as well as the Yubel Fiendsmith version might overtake the Tenpai and put it in first place or something, third place. But we will have to see how all of this works out and how hard they will hit this deck. But for now, this is just the strongest deck in the room. Go ahead, play this, enjoy this as long as you can. There will definitely be a time in the future when this deck is not really viable anymore. They will kill this in Master Duel. It's just a question of time. But let me know in the comments, what do you think? What are your top 5 decks? What are you going to play in the Duelist Cup? If you like my videos, please consider subscribing, hitting a thumbs up and the notification bell, and we will see each other in the next one, guys.